Okay, so welcome back to Tuesdays, Art History Tuesday. It's been a while, and then next week we're going to be off again, and I'll move forward. I know, because of benchmark tests. So as you guys know, we don't have a benchmark test in this class. We just have a unit test, which is due on Friday. So there are no class connects next week, the 25th to the 29th. And to remember that all benchmarks are due by the 29th at 5 p.m. Now my due dates are differently because everything is graded by me. There are no multiple choice tests or anything like that this quarter. So for me, all the due dates are due by this Friday, so I have a week to grade everything and get everything in. And for those watching this recording later, what I will probably do if someone has a dramatically low score is I'll be emailing you guys one-on-one to try and get some extra credit in with some of those missing assignments. Okay. So the essential question for this week is, how do artists represent reality? This is sort of a tricky question. Oh, yes. So they exist in the real world. So it reflects something that's real, or that we can all relate to. Perfect. Yeah, so this is a really tricky question in general, because essentially we all define reality as something a little bit different. So my version of reality is likely different from your version of reality, but whatever I create to show reality is hopefully something that we should agree upon. There's even studies today in the idea that, in fact, how the brain works is that everything that you see is essentially an hallucination, but that it's okay because it's a common hallucination that we can all agree on, and when it gets steps out of bounds is when people start to hallucinate things that we agree are not there. So those are the people who become the outliers. But essentially, the act of seeing is in fact a hallucination, which is really interesting to think about, that your brain's working the exact same way as someone else's brain, and if something goes off, it's like some chemical, even like a slight chemical imbalance can create a fictitious hallucination that we all agree except for one person that won't be there. It's really interesting the more we look into the human mind and think about reality. But of course, this is dealing with the realism art period, in which this study in the mind has not yet gotten so sophisticated. So if you want to take one of these and I'll take the other, what's happening in this picture? And I'm just pointing at a couple of different things that you can see. So just all you have to do is tell us what we see that we're looking at. And some of it's kind of obscure. A cup or a jar, right. So back in the day, if you guys might imagine, there was flies and dust and things everywhere. Houses were less hygienic, so it was really common to have, it's like a tankard right here. Your cups often have lids, essentially, and that there's this a piece spiking up right at the edge of it, and you can imagine that the drinker, I'll just bolden that for you, the drinker would actually push that back so that they can get into the cup and drink out of it. It's actually pretty practical. I feel like we do a lot of water bottles today with the same idea. And I'm going to write down here. So we're actually looking at a bowl of apples and pomegranates. And when you're looking at this, what are some things that you notice about the fruit in particular? Yeah, there's a variety of colors here. It looks like these apples and pomegranates are definitely in season 2, right? Maybe there's some dirt on them, but none of them look outwardly rotten or anything like that. So what makes you wonder about this piece? Mm-hmm. It almost looks like there's a spotlight coming in, right? And this actually is, in fact, a pretty small amount of window light coming in. And can you guess what room you would be in that has a very small window? It's not going to be in your house. That might be a tricky question. I'll give you a hint. The window is small enough that an adult body could not fit through it. So where do you think we are? We're in a place that it matters that you're not sure. Okay, good. All right. I know I kind of threw people off here. We are, in fact, in a jail cell, believe it or not. The artist pictured here is Gustave Courbet, who was a very wealthy but rebellious artist back in the day. So believe it or not, this image is one of both privilege and rebellion. Gustave Courbet was a very intense member of the realist movement. He wanted to paint the world how it actually was. Like, he often was known for going into impoverished areas of France and painting people at home, and he painted a lot of really, upsetting scenes for the wealthy class, because back in the day, philanthropy was very different. How the wealthy provided for the poor is completely different back in 1800s France versus current day U.S. It was believed that the wealthy were disgusted by the poor and that they should just build up bigger walls to keep the poor out so they wouldn't have to see the filth, rather than paying them better wages or providing for a better life. So Gustave Courbet was actually one of the wealthy, believe it or not, and he was often a political prisoner as well. And how do you become a political prisoner when you are in 1800s France? It's something that we are allowed to do today in the U.S., but not back in France. Yes, exactly. All you have to do is the basic political protest. So the same things that you see on the mall in the protests around the country happening today with complete freedom, or there should be complete freedom. In some cases there isn't. You would be punished for in 1800s France. So Gustave Courbet was often trying to, one of the wealthy class, trying to push for better needs and more equality for the poor, and then again and again he was thrown into a prison. But prisons were also operating differently back in the day. So, now we have, well, okay, I'll reframe it. Back in the day, prisons were all privatized, meaning that prisons were businesses in which the prison guard or magistrate or essentially the owner of the prison could make money off of the prisoners kept. And if you were a prisoner of poor class, you would get fed almost nothing. Many people starved in the prisons back in the day. You get no medical treatment. You'd be in a giant group cell and face a lot of violence. and you were allowed to die in prison, for sure. Versus people like Gustave Courbet, who paid money while he had to go to prison, but while he was there, he paid money to the jailer to let him have his own cell. His sister would bring him, this is a tankard of beer, and then a bowl full of apples and fruit. And imagine how wealthy you must be to have this tray of fruit in your jail cell. You know, we often, I think, misunderstand today how truly wonderful fruit can be. And back then, you know, this was a sweet and super savory and wonderful thing to eat. So, oh yeah, also his sister brought him his paints and his palettes and like his whole set. So he had a whole studio set up in his jail cell. While yes, he was suffering and imprisoned by the government, he was nowhere near the equals that he was trying to also send money to and protect. So this is definitely Gustave Courbet kind of in a nutshell. The picture itself isn't that interesting, but the setting really is. If you can imagine, you can see beyond the edges of the frame and how this table would continue out into the rest of the jail cell, and you'll see one little box of light coming through and a man painting, but with like, he's not actually wearing the stripes, but I always imagine that he's wearing like the striped pajamas. But yeah, so this is Gustave Courbet in a nutshell. He wanted to paint things how they truly were. And this is an image of him right here. I always like to try and find an image of people now that we have so many pictures of the artist. And you can really see, he actually, I feel like style-wise, he would fit in really well today. Like, I live in Richmond, he could definitely, I feel like I've seen this guy in like downtown Richmond for sure. You know, definitely at a coffee shop, probably getting off his bike. This guy looks pretty realistic even to today's standards. And Courbet, along with many realists, completely hated the Romantic artists, the Romantic movement. They didn't hate their style necessarily, but they hated the subject. He wanted to paint things how they really were. He didn't want whimsical landscapes and seaside things. He wanted to focus on poverty and the disparity of the classes. Okay, so this is actually a really interesting link here, and I'm just going to also copy paste this into the chat in case you can't click it. This is actually a link recreating some of the techniques the artists used, and there's also a mix of quotes in here. So I'm going to set the timer in here, but you get the idea as you're watching through it. You're welcome to respond while you watch. I'll set it for 3 minutes, and let me know what surprises you about the artist's technique. Oh, hi, Erin. So we're just going to start this link right now. If you click on it, you're going to give me some feedback about this person recreating the artist's technique here and what surprises you about it. Cool. I think you, of all people, Erin, might really get into this. Mhm. Right. I totally agree there. He does lots of layering and textures. He actually kind of rarely uses the paintbrush. Like he only uses it in some portions of it. But he uses a lot of the palette knife and even like the pulling of using paper to pull out the paint to make it textured. Yeah. No, and that's the thing too. When you see his works in person, your instinct is to want to touch it. But of course, they're in a museum, so you shouldn't touch it. But his works almost like were sculptural, and that was a huge deal for how painting will start to change afterwards. We're starting to see that artists are really playing with texture of the paint, and they're not just stuck in the illusion of the paint. Yeah, he's kind of messy. Right, so you can tell that he probably did his paintings fairly quickly. And he did, in fact. He produced a lot of works. It looks like icing, exactly. And if you guys start painting with, so I feel like when we learn to paint, we often all start with watercolor. If you can think back to like when you were a little kid, that's probably one of the first paints you got access to, watercolor and then tempera. And watercolor teaches you to kind of be sparing with the paint. And yes, those dollar packs, especially at the dollar store, I remember those little watercolor packs with the trays and stuff for sure. The watercolor teaches you to be really sparing with the paint to make it last. But in fact, when you're working with oil paint and even acrylic, you can use something called a palette knife and really build up textures and such. Yeah, no, I do too, honestly. But it is very comforting to paint with paint like it's icing. But in order to do that, you have to actually use a lot more paint, which gets expensive. So if you ever wanted to kind of paint like the strategy that you see here, yeah, totally, like 3D painting, you can actually use something that you have, you can get from your kitchen, or if you don't have this in your kitchen, you can certainly get it at the grocery store or even the dollar store for like $1. You can actually mix in something called cornstarch. I don't know if you guys have ever used that before, but cornstarch is a thickening agent when you cook, but it's also a thickening agent when you paint. You can actually mix it in with your paints and it gets them really chunky and thick. So you can make a little bit last a lot. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, totally. And if you have like an allergy to corn or something like that, another common, I'm just going to put this in here for those watching the video later. Another common substitute is called arrowroot powder. It's not very expensive either, but it's a little bit less common. So I know some people have an allergy to corn, and that's like understandable too. But arrowroot powder or cornstarch, just mix a little bit in with your acrylic paint, and it really starts to thicken up. You'll be able to feel it. And you can actually use some baking supplies like the icing scrapers and such. Those are essentially the same thing as a palette knife. I know sometimes palette knives can be expensive. So if you already have some cake supplies at home, you can recreate this. So the honors question for today is, and maybe kind of address this in the very beginning, it's a sort of extension of the same question. Do you think that the artist's reality is the same as the viewer's reality? Yeah. Just promise Grandma you'll clean them up afterwards. Well, while we're looking at this, do we have any direct opinions thinking about this question here? Is the artist's reality the same as the viewer's reality? You think it depends? You know, for me, I think about my own life experience and how I perceive things and how that might really differ from someone seeing my work who's on the other side of the world. So my version of reality, you know, I have different preferences and understandings of the world than, say, you know, someone in India who has a whole different daily life schedule and cultural preferences. So my perception of something might not even make sense to a viewer. Yeah, definitely. And that's, that's one way we can learn from one another, but it can also seem so foreign, like literally so foreign to us if we have a different perception of reality. Okay, so this is an artist I want you guys to see who has actually a lot of similar techniques to Courbet, but this is a current artist. I have a link right here for him. Because I feel like when we're looking at artist works, it actually is best to look at a collection of works here. He does lots of portraits and different paintings and such, and his style isn't actually unusual. We see a lot of painters like this today. This is actually a pretty highly prized technical approach, the textures and the scratching and stuff. And I want you guys to check out these paintings, since we're in the same field of talking about this. Yeah. He paints like Van Gogh. I definitely agree. There's lots of intense primary colors. He's also not afraid to use the color black, which we're going to start seeing soon in the 1800s. People are going to step away from that pigment. So as we go through here, I want you guys just to give look through at that index, that link I've shared right there, and tell me if you have any other perceptions of this. I feel like this artist has pushed what Courbet was doing kind of like a lot further, right? Courbet is a little bit more subtle with the texture building up, but this guy is like, boom. This is textural. Yeah, so I feel like when we start to bring textures in and start to really push our colors, we make other further observations of our artist. Yeah, we make a lot more observations of the work. And what's interesting is textured pieces sell really well. They're known for selling very well. Now, if you live in Richmond or also in Northern Virginia, if you go and visit there a lot, there's two big sponsors for a lot of local artists, which actually tend to be big companies. So Capital One is a huge buyer of art in the area. And there's a lot of artists who posture themselves at different galleries and stuff, and some of their work will be collected by big industries. And what's interesting is like huge companies like Capital One, SunTrust, a lot of the banks, all collect art from local areas, and it's an investment, right? So they invest in an artist that they think their work will maintain a lot of worth throughout their life. So essentially, a painting that they buy early in their career will be worth, 10 times that much later in their career, or 30 times as much after their death. And then if a company is going on hard times, they'll try and sell off some of the work that has accrued a lot of value, which is a huge function of the auction houses. Anyway, a lot of companies are known to collect really textured pieces because those artists are known to sort of stand the test of time. People always like them. So that's something to sort of keep in the back of your mind in terms of painting. If you want to be a painter or work with paint, people respond well to the textures you can create with paint. They look for different stuff, obviously, in sculpture or photography or things like that. But painting in particular, texture always sells really well. Yeah, so definitely something to consider, because starting at your age too, if you have work up in a gallery show, and there are some galleries out there who show students or show student works amongst masterworks, if you start to sell, you can obviously get your work bought by a company, and rather than just a person. And the whole point of them keeping your work is they're investing in you. Okay. So let's, you guys, we'll just do a free-for-all for this one. So how would we describe the style? I feel like the style is super obvious this time. This is realistic. And, not very whimsical, right? It's kind of plain. But in the process, you guys saw from the video how Courbet would paint. Yeah. That's very texturing. There's a lot of apples and pomegranates in that bowl too. Like, those would last you a while. Just imagine how long it would take you to eat all those apples. Like, this is a good, like, 2-week supply minimum. He's probably sharing those apples with other people. Lots of layering and texturing. Right. Cool. So if you guys are good, we'll move on to the next slide in 3, 2, 1. And then we'll do the compare and contrast from last week, or the other week and this week. Actually, I'm going to say they have a similar color palette. Yeah, they're both definitely incorporated texture. I feel like, though, these two men would have a lot in common intellectually, even though they demonstrate it differently, right? Like, the abolitionist works to the right. He clearly is caring not only about a lower class, but the enslaved class in the Americas, versus the work over here to the left. He's clearly caring about lower classes as well. Yeah, emotional, realistic. You know, one guy was a protester, like the guy to the left, and the other guy was kind of quiet. Like, he didn't get arrested or anything. He allowed his work to protest for him. General lighting. Yeah, and the other one is almost has a spotlight on it. One light source. We can also go exterior, interior, right? But it's kind of cool to see works side by side and knowing that they were painted around the same time. All right. I feel like we got a lot of good stuff here. So if you guys are good to move on, I will change the slide in 3, 2, 1. So how do you think this work affected the art world? And for this, I would also really think about that video once again that you saw with the strategies. Yeah. Yeah, Courbet inspired definitely the next wave of artists coming through about with really texture. And his quotes, because Courbet was a major writer as well. So that's another reason why he got arrested. Not only would he do actual protests, but he actually wrote a number of very persuasive articles in the, then you have evidence in a court, of course, of his illegal activity. And I say that with air quotes. But Courbet, those quotes that you see in there inspired a whole new wave of academic artists on what paint is and what does it mean to be painting in this world. Layers and well-liked texture for sure. So he might not have been a well-liked person, but his technique was very appreciated. And lastly, how does this impact you? I feel like for me, I definitely want to go paint today. Yeah, want to go mix the cornstarch in. I had an art teacher who, my junior year, she gave everyone in the class a challenge. So we had, I think it was after the first quarter, she got to know everyone. In the second quarter, she gave everyone a challenge to complete within a 9-week period. And, you know, for some she was like, focus on still lives, and others she would say, really work to just draw with the pen more. And for me, she said to develop a new art medium, or make my own materials. So I made my own paint, really interestingly enough. So like I was like, okay, what can I do? And I made my own paint. I really blossomed with that assignment. And I did everything. I would crush up blueberries and mix it in with cornstarch. And I would boil it together, and that made some paint. Yeah. How's it going, by the way, Elizabeth? I'm going to turn off the recording, by the way. Okay, everyone. The recording is ending.